Hey you guys, we are going to start the heart today. Hopefully you did your diagrams, which will make this make a lot more sense. There is a reason to my madness. I've given you all those diagrams and you having to do that prior to us talking. So we're going to do a brief overview. This is a little different things that talk about the heart itself and how it's really not related to emotions. But anyway, it's just a couple of little anecdotes about the heart by a couple of different people. We're going to do a basic overview of the cardiovascular system really quick so that you can have a quick review so you understand kind of where we're going with all the things related to the heart. So the circulatory system, it's made up of three main components. Those three main components are the pump, the transport system, and the transport medium. So if we think about that respectively, the pump would be your heart, the passageway would be your vessels, and the transport medium would be your blood. Be sure you know the three components of the cardiovascular system. You'll have a few quizzes over this, so just be sure you know what that is. There are two circuits in the circulatory system. There's the pulmonary circulation, and then there is systemic circulation. So pulmonary circulation, it really has to do with, or what its function is basically just to oxygenate the blood and get rid of carbon dioxide and some other waste. So that's its function. Its function is to for the heart and the blood to connect with the lungs to get oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. Pulmonary circulation only has to do with the heart and the lungs and the vessels that travel around. So it takes blood from the right ventricle and it sends it out the pulmonary arteries. Now I want to tell you the pulmonary arteries are the only arteries in the body that carry deoxygenated blood. The pulmonary arteries are the only arteries in the body that carry deoxygenated blood. Then it sends it from the pulmonary arteries into the lungs, the capillary beds in the lungs around the alveoli, where gas exchange happens. You breathe in, you bring oxygen in, it goes into those, the arterial parts of or the venous part of the capillary beds on the alveoli. The carbon dioxide goes out into the alveoli. You breathe out, you get rid of that carbon dioxide. And then the pulmonary veins take oxygenated blood back to the left atrium. Now, the pulmonary veins are also the only veins in the body that have oxygenated blood. Every other vein in the body has deoxygenated blood. Hopefully you guys did the circulation part because it talks about pulmonary and systemic circulation on your labeling. So hopefully you did that. So what is the function of pulmonary circulation? To obtain oxygen, release carbon dioxide. It has to do with mechanical respiration. The route, like I said, the route is from the right ventricle to the right pulmonary or to the pulmonary arteries to the lungs. Now, what you see here is in blue. Blue means that is deoxygenated blood. Red means it is oxygenated blood. So when it leaves the left ventricle, goes to the pulmonary arteries and gets to the lung from there, it is deoxygenated. Gas exchange happens. Oxygen is picked up through the pulmonary and in the capillary beds. It sends blood to the pulmonary vein and then back to the left atrium. I would know the route of pulmonary circulation simply because it is important to know where gas exchange actually happens and what the components are for pulmonary circulation. So you have something that is a little similar to this, much more complex than you have, but it discusses how blood poor, and I will tell you blood poor or deoxygenated blood is generally associated with the right side of the heart. And oxygenated blood or oxygen-rich blood is associated with the left side of the heart. So there you see that diagram of how pulmonary circulation takes place. The second circuit would be systemic circulation, and basically that helps maintain cellular respiration. So it gets oxygen and nutrients. What is its function? Is to get oxygen and nutrients to the rest of the body, to all of the other systems. The route, so hopefully you worked on that. when you worked on your systemic circulation and you labeled all of that so you know where that is. It's another one of the reasons I had you do that before. So it starts in what chamber? Systemic circulation starts in the left ventricle, and it sends it out through the aorta. The aorta sends it out into the rest of the body, so it sends it out through the aortic trunk. You have the brachia, where it branches off into the head, into the upper trunk. You have a descending aorta, which sends blood down into the abdomen and the lower parts of the body. And then those where gas exchange happens at the cellular level or at the organ level and the system level, that's where those capillary beds are that are single cell epithelium. That's where gas exchange happens easily at the cellular level. And then the vena cava, all of the vessels, the veins, the venules and the veins bring that blood back to the inferior and superior vena cava, back to the heart. So the aorta is your main oxygenated artery, and it branches off into smaller arteries and then arterioles. The arterioles and venules meet to make a webbing where gas exchange can happen. Remember that veins have arteries. We'll talk more about veins and arteries a little later. So there's systemic circulation so that you can see kind of what's going on that level. I would be sure I understood the difference between and what is going on with pulmonary and systemic circulation. Now we're going to talk about the heart itself. The heart itself, we're going to talk about the gross anatomy. So what is gross anatomy? Gross anatomy is actually what you can see. So it's the parts of the heart you can see that are visible with the eye, not microscopic, but what you can actually see. And as we dissect the heart, you'll be able to see this in much more detail. So the size and shape of the heart, you need to know this because you're going to be comparing it to a sheep's heart, and you need to understand the difference in the size and the weight and all of that in relation to the sheep heart, because that's part of your lab report, is to compare them. So the base of the heart is the superior portion, or the top of the heart. We don't always think about the base of something being at the top. Most of us think of it as being at the bottom, but the base of the heart is actually your two atria. The right and left atria make up the base of the heart. You have an apex. The apex is the inferior or the blunt rounded portion of the heart where the ventricles meet. In between the right and left side of the heart, you have something called a septum, and it is a thick fibrous wall that separates the chambers so that blood doesn't overflow back and forth. So the heart itself, it weighs about 10 ounces, so the size of a decent size steak, or about 300 grams. Your heart is about the size of your fist. It's about at the base, so at the two ventricles, or the two atria at the top, they're about 3.5 inches wide. From the top to the bottom of your heart, it should be about 5 inches, and from front to back, anterior to posterior, it's about 2.5 inches thick. So when you think about the size of your heart, that's a normal heart. Now, there are people who have something called cardiomegaly, which is an enlarged heart for multiple different reasons. That particular heart would be larger than expected. Things that can cause an enlarged heart would be things like, and I would remember some of these things, obesity, congestive heart failure, and other types of heart damage that can cause your heart to be larger than necessary. Sometimes people will have ischemic issues, not necessarily a full-blown heart attack, but they'll have an issue where there is repeated loss of oxygen to where it needs to be for just very short periods, not enough time to do damage, permanent damage, and sometimes that will also cause the heart to enlarge. So it can make up for the workload that's needed. So here we can see the superior vena cava. At the bottom, you can see the inferior vena cava down below that webbing that's attached to the diaphragm. You can see the base of the heart, which are where the pulmonary trunk and the aorta come out of the right and left atria. The apex of the heart at the bottom, where the apex of the heart where the ventricles meet. You can also see the coronary arteries and veins that give the heart nourishment itself. On the outside, you see that membrane on the outside of the heart. What you're seeing there, that is a that's the parietal pericardium, and that is the membrane that covers the heart itself. You also see that there are pulmonary membranes, and I want to talk to you for a second about the importance of the diaphragm. So we know that when we breathe in and we breathe out, the diaphragm lifts and relaxes, or contracts and relaxes along with the lungs. The other thing that's important, if you can see there how the heart is webbed to the diaphragm, the importance for that is to make sure that it stays in place, but also that it helps maintain the appropriate thoracic pressure. The thoracic area is the lungs, the heart, the chest area inside the rib cage. That would be your thoracic area. So that diaphragm also helps maintain optimal pressure so that the lungs perform appropriately and the heart performs appropriately. And as we talked about pulmonary circulation, and we know how important oxygenation is for our body, for our brain, for all function, it's very important that they all work together. So I want to make a quick review as we talk about this, where we talk about the cavities of the body. We have talked about this before, but I just want to run back through it again in case you have forgotten. You have the thoracic cavity, that would be the chest, which includes the pulmonary cavity where the lungs are housed, the mediastinum, which is where the sternum and a large portion of the heart are, and then you have the pericardial cavity, and that's where the heart itself is. So if you look at the location of the heart itself is mostly to the left, and it is mediastinal. Remember, when you look at a diagram, it's like a mirror image. So it's the actual opposite of how we would define it. So when I'm looking at the right side, it's really, when I point to the left side of the diagram with my left hand, it's actually referring to the right side of the diagram. Then you have the abdominal and the pelvic, or the abdominal pelvic cavity, and it's separated by the diaphragm. Okay, so here we're going to look at the position of the heart a little closer. Some of the lung and the rib cage have been removed in this particular diagram, so you can see the actual location of the heart in reference to the lungs. Now, if you look on the right lung, you can see that there are 3 lobes. There is a lobe right here, the upper lobe. This is the middle lobe. You see a line there, and then you have a lower lobe. On the left side, we only have an upper and a lower lobe, and that would be because the heart has to have space in the chest cavity so that the heart can actually maneuver appropriately. If this middle lobe was in there completely, there would be excessive friction, and it would cause lung and or heart issues. This is a anterior posterior view, so like that would be what the heart would look like, or the thoracic cavity would look like if a CT scan did transverse plane cross sections of the thoracic cavity. So here you can see the lungs themselves. You can see where the pulmonary veins, or the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary veins come in. You can also see here where the bronchus, where they branch off. You can see the vertebrae here. There's the aorta itself running back there. You have the pulmonary trunk here. You have valves in this area of the heart, and then there's the sternum at the front. So it just shows you location in reference to the heart itself. So the pericardial sac, we're going to talk about the pericardium. I'm not going to refer to it as the pericardial sac. I'm always going to refer to it as the pericardium, and that's the double layer or the bilayer membrane that protects and supports and nourishes the heart itself. So once again, it's a double-walled membrane that covers and encloses the heart. It's there to prevent friction. It is there to just kind of protect the heart itself. If think about it, every time the heart were to beat, if it didn't have that membrane around it with the lubrication that comes along with that membrane, it would actually have friction with the lung every time you breathe or every time the heart would beat. The pericardial sac has a fluid field, and you have a figure, and I forgot which figure it is that you labeled. That's why I put X there, because I meant to look and I didn't. I'm so sorry. There's a figure where it talks about the pericardial membrane. The fluid inside the pericardial membrane is synovial fluid. It's just like what's in your knee joint, similar to what's in the knee joint, similar to what's in the bursa sacs when we talked about the muscular system. So the same kind of fluid is in there in those membranes, in between those membranes, to help prevent friction. So we're going to talk about cardiac disorders. There is a table in the reading that I'll give you a little later that shows this more in detail. But cardiac disorders related to the pericardium that you need to remember will be pericarditis. That would be inflammation of the pericardium. That's very dangerous and can lead to significant issues with cardiac output. Then we have a pericardial effusion. That's where the fluid in between the pericardium, in between the pericardial linings or between the layers of the membrane, it collects excessive fluid. If it collects excessive fluid, then the heart can't beat as well as it needs to. It can also affect respiration. It can affect the lungs themselves along with the heart. What we hear when that fluid accumulates there is called cardiac tamponade. And what that sounds like is, it literally sounds like, let me see if I can get you real quick, pull up a video that will let you hear what cardiac tamponade sounds like so that you can hear that swishing noise. Let's see if we can get a video of that where you can actually hear it. This may just explain it. And I'm sorry, I know it's running slow. But hopefully it will give you guys an opportunity to actually hear it. And I'm sorry, we have a 5-second commercial there I can't get past.
Hey guys, Nurse Mike here, and welcome to SimpleNursing.com. Now, before we get today's lecture started, please remember, for oxygen, the heart tries to compensate by pumping faster and faster.
All right, let me see if you can actually hear it. It doesn't give us a one you can actually hear on that one. I'm sorry, guys. Let me get back.
Nurse Mike here, and welcome to SimpleNursing.com.
Let's see. I'm sorry, guys. Try again. I really wanted you guys to hear it. And as you can tell, there we go. Well, now you're seeing it. See how you can see how significantly different it's beating. All right, I'm going to give up. I'm sorry. You can actually just see what it looks like, but it doesn't. Sorry that it doesn't let you. Doesn't let you hear it. I really want you guys to hear it. Let me get back to where we were. Okay, and there is a actual kind of a diagram to show you the bilayer wall of the pericardium, and then the fluid would be, that synovial fluid would be in the center of that those two layers. Okay, so there are two layers. Let's talk about each layer. So you have the parietal pericardium. The parietal pericardium is it's a fibrous layer on the outside. It's thick. It has a layer that is outside and a layer that is inside, internal and external layers. It's very thick. It's there to protect it exteriorly. The parietal pericardium is the part of the membrane of the heart that when we dissect the sheep heart, some of them still have the membrane on it. It will be the part of the membrane that you actually see. It's what's covering the outer portion of the heart. And then you have the visceral. Visceral always means near the organ. Visceral means organ. So if it's a visceral pericardium, that means that is the layer that is closest to the heart wall. Or I often refer to it as the epicardium. The epicardium is the layer that is closest to the heart. It's smooth. It's thin. It has it's always has that moist serous layer that helps with lubrication. It covers the surface of the heart itself. So you have the parietal and the visceral pericardium that make up the pericardial sac or the pericardium itself. You have parietal and visceral parts, and it is filled with serous fluid, a synovial serous fluid. So you can see there kind of what it's doing, what are the functions. So I would know what the layers are and what the functions are. These are marked up and specifically there for you to remember. So if we look, there is the visceral pericardium there by the heart. We have the myocardium, which is this thick portion here. Myocardium just means heart muscle. Myo means muscle, and cardi means heart, means pertaining to. So it's it's pertaining to the heart muscle. And then you have the endocardium. The endocardium, we'll talk about in a little more detail, is a much thinner layer. It is the part of the heart that actually comes into contact with blood that helps with that pumping action. So the outermost heart layer we've already talked about is the epicardium. It is that serous membrane that covers the heart that helps with lubrication. The myocardium, and I would know the 3 layers of the heart wall. That's the actual heart muscle. It is the thick muscular layer of the heart. It has a fibrous skeleton. So it also has fibrous collagen and elastin fibers in there. It has that to help it maintain shape. It has it to help maintain the pressure and the shape of the valves that are in the heart. It also is there to help the heart once it contracts. When it relaxes, it goes back to, it has those elastic fibers to ensure that it can go back to its regular shape. It has to be very strong, and it has to have a very intricate, meticulously woven fibers so that it can beat 100,000 times a day. And literally your heart beats about 100,000 times a day. It beats it but it does that for your entire lifetime. So think about 100,000 beats a minute over your lifetime, and people live to be 100, 105, 110. So it's going to beat a lot of time. It's got to be able to maintain its structure and shape so that it contracts appropriately to circulate blood. And then the endocardium is the thin, smooth layer that is on the inside of the heart that covers the hollow portions of the heart itself. The heart is a hollow organ, and the endocardium is the innermost layer that actually is the one that comes in contact with blood. It's where your valves are connected. It's where blood pumps through. So it's made of endothelial cells. It's made of continuous, thin, simple epithelium cells. So you can look again, there are the layers of the heart. The myocardium is the thick muscular layer. The endocardium is the inside layer. And then the epicardium is the outside layer. We're looking here at some of the parts of the fibrous skeleton. We have the right AV, or the tricuspid valve there, and you can see that fibrous external area that is helping it keep its shape. We have on the left side, we have the left AV, or the mitral valve. Then you have the aortic and pulmonary valves. Those are both considered semilunar valves. And so we have those types of valves, and then we have that really strong fibrous ring that supports those valves so that they can maintain their shape, and that they can open and close throughout our life to maintain structure. Now, there are times that valves do get worn due to different types of cardiac issues, hypertension, endocarditis. Different things can happen to cause valve issues. When that happens, they can actually replace those valves with either a PIG or a mechanical valve. Both take extensive maintenance to make sure that your body doesn't reject those and that you don't develop clots and things like that. But they are able to replace the valves if there is an issue. Okay, so its function is the fibrous skeleton of the heart is there for support. The firm base of the heart valves keep it open, and the opening of the great vessel to maintain their shape and their function over the course of the life of the heart, along with all of the pressure that goes along with pumping that blood regularly. It also anchors to the cardiac muscle. So if we go back here, you can see where those valves are anchored to the cardiac muscle there. These are the chordae, or some people refer to them as the heartstrings, but they actually are connected to very thick, fibrous, strong cords that attach to the cardiac muscle. Okay, let me get back over here. Also, the really thick fibrous skeleton is an important electrical conductor. Why is it an electrical conductor? Well, the heart you have a sinoatrial and an atrioventricular node that we'll talk about a little bit later in this. But you have to actually send nerves impulses, which will show up as electrical activity on an EKG. And what it's doing is it's sending the information for the heart to contract the atrium or the ventricle. And what it does is the sinoatrial node is also known as the pacemaker of the heart. It starts the contractions of the atrium. It sends a signal to the atrioventricular node, which then sends that impulse down the bundle of His to the right and left bundle branches, and then onto the Purkinje fibers to make the ventricles contract. So there's a lot more involved in ventricular contraction than atrial contraction. And there are issues that can go. You can have cardiac issues related to both of the electrical conduction. You can have atrial fibrillation or atrial flutter, and you can have supraventricular tachycardia, where the ventricles are beating fast and the atrium are beating normal. You can have ventricular fibrillation, which is bad. That's normally when people are getting shocked on the table because they are having either a heart attack or full cardiac arrest. We see that with those electrical issues. Sometimes people have things like bigeminy and trigeminy and different kind of electrical issues, and we will talk about that later in this lecture. Okay, so we want to ask a couple questions. Be sure you can answer. Where does the heart lie most? Is it right or left of the medial plane? Was it more right or more left? And then, what are the 3 layers of the heart, beginning with the outermost layer? Be sure that you know those. Okay, you're going to have one more lecture for today, and then when you come to class on Monday, be sure that you have taken some paper notes. I would have handwritten my notes. That might be very beneficial for you. If you don't, then it might kind of hurt you when you come to class next week, because you will have a quiz over this information, both of the lectures. All right, everybody, have a great day, and I will be back with you later.